So, it's been recently revealed that Cormac McCarthy, one of the greatest living writers today, a writer of incredibly rich, haunting and resonant prose, it has been revealed that after 16 years, this year, 2022, Cormac McCarthy is set to publish not just one new novel, but two new novels. It's been 16 years since the publication of The Road in 2006, and 2022 is going to be a great year for Cormac McCarthy fans. Now, there's actually been some excited whisperings about the possibility for a new Cormac novel in recent years, but we haven't really heard anything. The novel was supposed to be called The Passenger, and we've known about that since a few years after the publication of The Road, around 2009. And for years, Cormac McCarthy fans have wondered what's happening with that novel, and we've heard nothing. Essentially nothing. Now, Cormac McCarthy, as you know if you're a fan, doesn't do press, he doesn't give a lot away, and I think his publishers honour that. So we don't know what's been happening, but it's very, very exciting to know that two new novels are coming out. So what I'd like to do today is I would like to react to any information I can find about those two new Cormac McCarthy novels. I've saved my reaction, I haven't looked anything up, and I want to share that with you today. Over the past few months, I have been fully immersed in Cormac McCarthy in the lead up to the Blood Meridian lecture series. And what I find when I consistently reread my favourite authors is that if you can reread them endlessly and your appreciation only deepens, your wonder only increases, then you have a great writer on your hands. Some writers are inexhaustible, and some writers do not hold up to consistent and relentless deep rereadings. What I found was Cormac McCarthy most certainly did. When I first discovered Cormac McCarthy, I found a writer who I felt to be thoroughly in simpatico with. I have a handful of writers, a small number of writers, who I have thought, over the course of my life, if I were to be a great writer, this is what I would want my prose to look like. And Cormac McCarthy is most certainly one of those great writers. The challenge with Cormac McCarthy's books, but most certainly with Blood Meridian, which we will be breaching together, we'll be having a guided reading experience through Blood Meridian, through that bloody bleak cosmos. The challenge with Blood Meridian is you might not be able to get all the way through it on your first read. This is something that I continuously hear newcomers to Blood Meridian come up against time and again. This is a very common response to Blood Meridian, putting it down, being unable to go on, being unable to bear, to stomach the horrific bloodshed throughout that book. I myself, I put it down twice before I was able to fully get through it, and since then I have reread it more times than I can count. I think it is a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece for lovers of linguistic style, lovers of densely packed prose, syntax, cadence, rhythm, all influenced by the Bible, Shakespeare, Moby Dick, which we're reading at the moment and just so happens to be Cormac McCarthy's favourite novel. Cormac McCarthy's prose style is a curious blend of the high ancient and the incredibly modern. He's a difficult writer and he's difficult stylistically, but that's just a very small hurdle to overleap. And once you have overleapt that, and you will do so quite swiftly, it is his thematic preoccupations that are really difficult to stomach. Blood Meridian, as the title might suggest, is a banquet of blood. It's incredibly visual, and it's visual in all the areas that perhaps you wouldn't want visuality. Let me give you a quick example of Cormac McCarthy's prose style. A rattling drove of arrows passed through the company, and men tottered and dropped from their mounts. Horses were rearing and plunging, and the Mongol hordes swung up along their flanks and turned and rode full upon them with lances. The company was now come to a halt, and the first shots were fired, and the grey rifle smoke rolled through the dust as the lancers breached their ranks. And keep in mind that we're about to experience one long sentence in a moment. The kid's horse sank beneath him with a long pneumatic sigh. He had already fired his rifle, and now he sat on the ground and fumbled with his shot pouch. A man near him sat with an arrow hanging out of his neck. He was bent slightly, as if in prayer. The kid would have reached for the bloody hoop iron point, but then he saw that the man wore another arrow in his breast to the fletching, and he was dead. Everywhere there were horses down and men scrambling, and he saw a man who sat charging his rifle while blood ran from his ears, and he saw men with their revolvers disassembled, trying to fit the spare loaded cylinders they carried, and he saw men kneeling who tilted and clasped their shadows on the ground, and he saw men lanced and caught up by their hair and scalped standing, and he saw the horses of war trample down the fallen, and a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. Among the wounded, some seemed dumb and without understanding, and some were pale through the masks of dust, and some had fouled themselves or tottered brokenly onto the spears of the savages, now driving in a wild freeze of headlong horses with eyes walled and teeth cropped, and naked riders with clusters of arrows clenched in their jaws, and their shields winking in the dust, and up the far side of the ruined ranks in a piping of bone flutes, and dropping down off the sides of their mounts with one heel hung in the wither's strap, and their short bows flexing beneath the outstretched necks of the ponies until they had circled the company and cut their ranks in two, and then rising up again like funhouse figures, some with nightmare faces painted on their breasts, riding down the unhorsed Saxons and spearing and clubbing them, and leaping from their mounts with knives, and running about on the ground with a peculiar bandy-legged trot, like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion, and stripping the clothes from the dead, and seizing them up by their hair, and passing their blades about the skulls of the living and the dead alike, and snatching aloft the bloody wigs, and hacking and chopping at the naked bodies, ripping off limbs, heads, gutting the strange white torsos, and holding up great handfuls of viscera, genitals, some of the savages so slathered up with gore they might have rolled in it like dogs, and some who fell upon the dying and sodomized them with loud cries to their fellows. Whew! Many have claimed that Blood Meridian is the great American novel, and many have claimed Cormac McCarthy to be the greatest living American writer. And if that's true, and I think it might be, how fortunate we are that he is still living and he is still working relentlessly, bringing out masterpiece after masterpiece. Is Blood Meridian the great American novel? Potentially, but it's definitely in fine company. For me personally, I put Moby Dick up there as the great American novel. But if we're talking the 20th century, then Blood Meridian, that surely takes the title. Now let's have a little look at what information we can find about Cormac McCarthy's two new novels. Okay, let's start with an article from The Guardian which came out recently. Cormac McCarthy, two new novels coming in 2022, 16 years after The Road. 16 years since his last novel, The Road. Cormac McCarthy's long-awaited follow-up has finally been confirmed, with not one, but two new novels to be published 1 month apart later this year. Let's pause there just a moment. So, when I caught up with McCarthy's back catalogue, his oeuvre, obviously for a little while I was feeling quite saddened that, yeah, he's getting on, he's in his late 80s at this point, I think he's almost 90, let me double check that. Yes, so he is 89 years old at time of recording, and so when 16 years elapse since a writer's last work, you start to think, maybe there's not any more coming out, and I thought that was a shame. It was a shame because he's still living, and as far as I'm concerned, and yes, he's in great company, he's the greatest living writer today, in the English language, at the very least. So you start to think, well, such a master of the craft, you would really hope that he would leave something behind before he gets a little bit too old. So the news that there's not just one but two is tremendous. I wonder if this was choreographed specifically. I do know that Cormac McCarthy has a relentless work ethic when it comes to writing. He writes for hours a day and he juggles multiple manuscripts. He likes multiple projects. Now, some writers just need to work on one work in progress at a time and then move on to the next, but he likes to juggle them. So I wonder if he has been writing about these or thinking about them in some capacity for all of that length of time, or if maybe he just had a little bit of a slumber, or quite a long slumber at 16 years, and recently felt the urge to create again. He's not a writer who pumps out books incredibly regularly. He's also not a writer that does it for the money. If you know anything about McCarthy's background, you'll know that he had very humble beginnings and he turned down interviews for many, many years, even when rent was due and he needed to eat. He didn't like the limelight, and that's not what he got into writing for. It wasn't the business or the show business side of things that drew him to the craft, and I think it shows when you pick up one of his novels. Luckily, he does have incredible renown today and he is revered. Anyway, let's go on. The Passenger, out in October. So that's the title of the next one coming out. And Stella Maris, out in November. Follow siblings Bobby and Alicia Weston. And this is a quote, who are tormented by the legacy of their father, a physicist who helped develop the atom bomb. Okay, that's immediately a really curious line of subject matter right there. Regarded as one of the greatest living US writers, 88-year-old McCarthy has not published a novel since The Road in 2006. The post-apocalyptic survival story won the Pulitzer Prize and became a bestseller. I'd say The Road is the book that McCarthy is most known for. It's often an entrance work to McCarthy, and it is great. It's not my personal favourite. My personal favourite is hands down Blood Meridian, but The Road is definitely worth reading. It's a tremendous book. It's very, very chilling. If you are a father, you'll probably find it incredibly moving and upsetting. I won't give anything away in case you haven't read it or seen the film. There's one scene in particular that I always think about when I think about The Road. You might know which one I'm talking about. Let's go on a little bit. It's an unusually long gap for the novelist, who has published 10 novels since 1965. Yes, so he doesn't exactly pump them out, but he did have a more regular publication schedule. A schedule that would be more reflective of his quality, I think. If you look to writers like Kazuo Ishiguro, for example, another prize winner, someone who is revered, they don't publish books every single year. They don't publish 2 books a year. His first book, The Orchard Keeper, came out in 1965. Keep in mind that Cormac McCarthy was born in 1933. His next one, Outer Dark, was published 3 years later in 1968. Then we have Child of God, 5 years after that in 1973. We have Sutri in 1979. And then, after 6 years from that, we have Blood Meridian in 1985. And then there's a 7-year gap before we get to All the Pretty Horses. So he usually has like a half-decade gap thereabouts, anywhere from 3 to 6-ish years between novels. So let's go back to this article. The Passenger has been highly anticipated since 2009, when a Texas university acquired McCarthy's archive, including notes for an unfinished novel with that working title. However, the notes were restricted until publication. The acquisition revealed that McCarthy was then working on 3 novels, but there had been no update in the decade since. Yeah, so I didn't expect that would go anywhere. I thought we might have a David Foster Wallace situation where if he had put anything together it would come out after his death. So I wasn't really expecting to hear anything on that, but it's interesting to know that Texas University had this on their radar in 2009, 3 years after The Road, so it does make you wonder if he has been working consistently on it for all that time, or maybe just living his life and coming back to it intermittently. On Tuesday evening, US publisher Knopf revealed McCarthy had the 2 books coming in 2022. McCarthy had delivered a full draft of one of the novels to his editors 8 years ago, kept secret at the publishing house. The Passenger, published on the 25th of October, opens as Bobby, a salvage diver working on the Gulf Coast in 1980, explores the wreckage of a sunken jet. That's pretty cool. He discovers that the black box, the pilot's bag, and one of the dead passengers are all missing. The 400-page novel has the pace and twists of a thriller as Bobby is drawn into the mystery of the crash. That sounds so cool. Stella marks the first time McCarthy has focused on a female protagonist. Yeah, actually, that would be interesting. If you've seen his interview with Oprah, which I believe is the first interview that he gave, he didn't want to deal with the press up until that point. She actually points this out. She says, you don't write women. Your novels are for men. And he said, essentially, it's because he doesn't know if he understands women and that they remain a mystery to him. And of course, Oprah said, even after 3 marriages, they remain a mystery to you. And he said, oh yes. But that will be interesting to see how he deals with a female protagonist. The 200-page novel, out on the 22nd of November, follows Bobby's sister, Alicia, a math prodigy whose intellect frightens people and whose hallucinations appear as characters with their own distinct voices. That's so cool and so different from the other one. I was planning on writing about a woman for 50 years, McCarthy told the Wall Street Journal in a 2009 interview. I will never be competent enough to do so, but at some point you have to try. I like that. McCarthy's editor at Knopf, Jenny Jackson, told the New York Times it's a format for Cormac to allow Alicia to explore her obsessions, which from what I can tell happen to be Cormac's obsessions. It's a book of ideas. When the manuscripts were completed, Knopf considered publishing the books as one volume, both on the same day or a year apart, but settled on a 1-month gap. I'd say the 1-month gap is a good idea. Don't put them in the same volume. Come on, give us 2 books. Here we have not 1 but 2 novels by pretty much America's greatest living novelist, Knopf publisher Reagan Arthur said. How do we publish in a way that gives readers time to experience one, but also gives readers the satisfaction of experiencing the conversation between the 2 novels? That's cool. Okay, so there's a link between the novels, that's what they're saying, so they're kind of related. The 2 novels mark a departure for McCarthy, who has set most of his works in the American South and Southwest, exploring humanity's capacity for good and evil in austere tales of great violence and depravity. The New York Times reported that McCarthy has been fascinated with mathematics and theoretical physics for years, having surrounded himself with experts in both fields at the Santa Fe Institute, a research institute where he has worked for decades. McCarthy, who rarely gives interviews and declined to speak for the announcement, is not unaware of the anticipation. Asked by Oprah Winfrey in 2007 if he cared that he had millions of readers, he said, "In all honesty, I have to say I really don't." I love that. You would like for the people who appreciate the book to read it, but as far as many people reading it, so what? I like that. He's a cool guy. He's a cool guy. Let's see if we can find another article that will shed any more light on these 2 books. Okay, this is from the New York Times. During a rare appearance in Santa Fe in 2015, Cormac McCarthy offered a tantalising glimpse of his work in progress, The Passenger, a novel that explored esoteric ideas about math, physics, and the nature of consciousness. Readers have been eager for the novel ever since. Widely revered as one of the greatest living American writers, McCarthy has not published the book, okay, we know this, since The Road. The intertwined novels, which represent a major stylistic and thematic departure for McCarthy, tell the doomed love story of a brother and sister. I want to read these so much. What's really cool is you find these writers who, even when they get to the age of 89 or 88, they're still experimenting and they're still forging on ahead and they're still trying to go in a different direction. Female protagonist, intertwined stories. I think that's amazing. He's obviously been playing around and experimenting, and it just makes you hope and wish that they go on living for quite a while. Go on living and go on writing. I thought this recently when we reread Great Expectations with the book club. That was quite near the end of Dickens's life. Whether he would have known it or not at that point is another matter. But what's interesting, if you look at his final novels, those works that he's kind of putting together after Great Expectations, the half-completed Mystery of Edwin Drood, and of course Great Expectations itself, what's evident is that Dickens was forging on ahead in a new direction, a really exciting new direction. He was challenging himself and he was rising to the challenge. And then he died, and he left us with a pretty good oeuvre, a big one, but of course we want more. When a writer's really great, we always wish that we had more. Let's read on a little bit. The siblings, Bobby and Alicia Weston, are tormented by the legacy of their father, a physicist who helped develop the atom bomb. Okay, and by their love for and obsession with one another. Okay, so interestingly, Stella Maris, which will be released in November, serves as a coda to the passenger, telling the story of Alicia. The narrative unfolds entirely in dialogue. Now that's really cool. As a transcript between Alicia and her doctor at a psychiatric institution in Wisconsin in 1972, where Alicia, a 20-year-old doctoral candidate in mathematics at the University of Chicago, receives a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. So Knopf, that's the publisher, is planning a hardcover printing of 300,000 copies for each book, and is also releasing a box set with a first printing of 50,000 copies in early December. I would say get one of those copies for yourself. Those copies, in not too much time, but in years to come, will be worth quite a bit of money. And it's just nice to collect these things as they come out and to say that you were there. It's really exciting stuff to have a first edition come out the year it came out and be there and read it the day it came out, the weeks to follow, and I think that's a really special thing about reading contemporary fiction. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I don't think we have a cover reveal just yet, which is a shame, but I'm definitely going to pick them up, whatever they look like. The novels will be released simultaneously in the United Kingdom, and foreign rights have sold in numerous countries, including France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Holland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland and Brazil. The arrival of the novels later this year will give McCarthy scholars and fans insight into questions and subjects that have long preoccupied him. What do you do after you've written The Road? Jackson said. The answer is 2 books that take on God and existence. Now, I've done a little scrolling and I'm trying to find some conversation about these 2 books, conversation about the hype on forums and message boards, but I can't actually find that much. So what I'd love to do is to ask your opinion. Let's get the conversation going. Let's get the chat about these books happening here. Let us know what you think of Cormac McCarthy, and let us know how you're feeling in the run-up to the release of his latest 2 novels. Are you excited? And let us know what Cormac McCarthy books you have enjoyed yourself. What would you recommend to others? What did you like about them? And what are you expecting from these 2 intertwined narratives coming out later this year in 2022? Thank you for reacting to the news with me. Have a lovely day and happy reading, everybody. Bye-bye for now.